Hey everybody, welcome back to the Centerville Grace Podcast, where every single week our journey is to help you, our church family, dive deeper into community, making sure that no one walks alone. I'm here with...
I'm Dave. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Dusty. Also, thank you for joining us.
And I'm Tony. Thanks for joining us.
There it is.
We're so glad you're here. Guys, what's happening in the life of the church this week? What's going on? Aside from the Super Bowl where the Birds won?
Yeah.
Go Birds.
That was not even a game.
I was surprised how bad that was.
That was a bad game. Just not competitive. But we had first of all, we had a great staff Monday, all staff meeting outside of the church. It was off-site, and we had it all day planning and just talking vision stuff, and I think it was great.
Yeah.
I was pretty tired afterwards. I don't know if you guys were pretty excited afterwards.
That's conversation. Those things exhaust you after a whole day.
It was a long thing. But following that, we had a fantastic night for disciple making. We had our Dayton Disciple Makers Network Equipped Conference that we host, that we hold every year, and we've held it here. This year was at Restoration, and I thought it was really great. I thought we had at least 60, 70 people there.
Yeah.
We had at least a dozen, I think, pastors interested in taking disciple making back into their churches, and so that's one of the workshops that I helped lead. And I thought it was really encouraging to see all the people and hear the stories.
Yeah, Dusty got to lead worship with combined band from multiple churches. I get to do a breakout on coaching and disciple making, and what I appreciate about those moments are where we really get to lean into what it means to be the body in a kind of a more complete way. So. It was really good. Dust, what else has happened in the life of the church that we need to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, we spent all day together on Monday, so nobody missed anything in anybody else's life on Monday. We did the whole thing together. Tuesday was hit or miss. But hey, this week, we are finally kicking off Discover Grace. That launches this coming week. I know we talked about the last couple weeks. But I'm excited. We've got a good roster right now, and there's still some room, tentatively, for a few more. Not too many more, but there's room for a few more.
Yeah, sign up.
But man, I'd love to see that thing just like overflowing every time we do it. And right now we're on track for that. So excited.
We got our new countertops in. If you've been listening and tracking with our kitchen
Did you really? Are
journey,
the right ones?
The right countertops are in. And
so is the kitchen done?
No, we still have the backsplash to do.
Are you going to do that yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to try.
I think you can.
I think I can, right?
That could have been a podcast on its own, man. The saga of the kitchen. I would have tuned in.
So I apologize if you don't really want to hear about the kitchen. But for those of you who are coming, we'll have the countertops in. So it's great. They came yesterday.
One of the things that I'm super excited about that I want to mention so that I don't forget we need to is our Man Up group.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
That's starting March 2nd.
Yep.
It's going to be 12 weeks long. We're going to have the first meeting here at the church, but eventually I think the goal is to try to maybe find some host homes. Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things that we're going to cover in that?
Well, goodness, we're trying to gather guys, especially guys who are on the fringes, who aren't really well connected, and maybe have a hard time with the life group structure model with co-ed kind of things, and just guys who just need a space for themselves. And we're going to talk about all things men related as far as leading in the home, work, just balancing work life, just a lot of stuff that just I think resonate with guys. Yeah.
So again, you've heard our rally cry at probably so many times it's annoying at this point, but we really do want and pray that no one walks alone. And so if you're a guy in our church family, you don't have to be a husband or a father. You just need to be a dude. And so if you want to come be a part of the group, we would love to have you. You probably already know where to go, but it's centervillegrace.org/next steps. You can sign up for Man Up. And get connected, and don't worry if you can't make all 12 weeks. Yeah. The goal is just to make enough where you feel connected to everybody else. So we'll talk a little bit about that on week 1 and kind of just lean in together. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it'll be fun to do it.
Yep. Great. Well, this week in the Gracie acronym, we are talking about the letter I. Dusty, why don't you take us through the letters and introduce the letter I?
I gotta remember what the letters are. Hold on. You're asking me on an early morning. Hold on. G was generous.
Yeah.
R is relational. Look, Dave's mouthing them to me. He's like, this is called coaching right here. A is authentic. Guys, we need to talk about ADD sometime. It's a real thing. Okay.
C is committed.
I was going to get there.
Okay.
You didn't give me a chance that time.
Opening the door.
Oh, and I is intentional.
That's right.
And so when you think
Yes.
about intentional as it pertains to your walk with Christ, what do you think about?
For me, I think about the thing I'm probably the worst at, which is establishing good, healthy spiritual habits and sticking with them. Because, like, intentional is that whole thing of, like, choosing to do it before we actually know if we can do it. So, like, for me, I've tried to put some of those practices in my life. So, like, fasting's been one I've been working on for 2025. And it's just one of those things I feel like, hey, if I can stick with this, I'm intentional about what I'm doing ahead of time, then it's like intentional about my relationship with the Lord. I'm intentional about taking time for Him. I'm intentional about my spiritual rhythms. That's really what we're called to, right? And those of us that are the worst at it are probably the ones that need it the most.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
So.
Dave, what about you? Intentional, what do you think of?
I think of habits, and I would love to dig a little deeper on that one. But priorities is another word that I think of when I think of intentionality. What's most important, and then putting that energy and focus and commitment into those things. You have to do that. Otherwise, intentional is like the idea of like swimming upstream in a way. Like you're not, if you just let your feet go, you're going to be going somewhere else. So you have to be intentionally moving, that you have to put energies and effort into something. And I think that's where habits come into play. Habits, you build that rut in a way enough to where you don't have to put so much energy and thought into it. It's kind of already been predetermined, and you just kind of go along with that habit. So I think habits are incredibly important. We all fall into habits. But are we intentionally creating habits that meet our priorities and values and goals?
Yeah, and a church term that we often use instead of the word habits is disciplines.
Exactly.
Right? What are your spiritual disciplines?
Yep.
And so I loved, I came out of Romans 12 this week, and it says this: "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." And what I love about this text specifically, and kind of that imagery that you used about swimming upstream, is that it really highlights the idea that the pattern of the world is downstream,
Yep.
and what we're trying to do is upstream.
Yep.
And so, Dust, you mentioned fasting in 2025. Let's pull back from that even a little bit more.
Yeah.
How do you decide what habits you're going to introduce into your life in any given season?
Yeah, so honestly, the best way that I've done it has been the last 2 years being at our men's retreat.
Yeah.
Well, because we did we started the Rule of Life exercise.
Yep.
It was the last one that we did, and we ended up ultimately doing that again with our life group, the Discover Grace Life Group. And that was where I created a lot of that stuff of, hey, what do I want the intentionality to look like going into the next year? And that's kind of where fasting came from, and also just putting together a schedule of like, hey, if I've got 7 days a week, this is what I want to be doing to make sure I'm connected with the Lord. Because, we joke a lot about when you work at a church, sometimes that actually makes it harder to connect with God more often. And it sounds ridiculous, right? But the reality is, like, man, when you're a pastor, you are living in everybody else's hurt all the time. And that takes a lot of emotional space, that takes a lot of mental space, and it just takes a lot of time. So, one of the things that's really easy, I think, for us to do, anybody who's worked in ministry, is it's easy for your own relationship with God to kind of get thrown off to the side because you're trying to invest in everybody else's relationship with God and try to counsel and coach through that.
Yeah.
So,
What about you, Dave? How do you establish some of your disciplines? How do you evaluate them? What's your rhythm for that?
Yeah, several years ago, going off kind of the idea of a rule of life, although I didn't have that language at that time, but I just realized I needed certain things in my life for me to function in a healthy, thriving way. And so I wanted to make sure once I identified those, I just kind of keep doing those things. And then I add and subtract some other things along the way, depending on the seasons of life and what God's doing in my heart and life. And so you just kind of add to it and realize you can't do everything. That's the other thing. Give yourself grace, too. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing that I'm learning. Because I'm a big right, wrong, should kind of guy. And I beat myself up if I fail or fall short of a goal that I had set for myself, but you do need to have grace in there too. So some guys use too much grace. I was the one not using enough. So
And then that becomes a little legalistic.
Exactly. And I don't want to be that.
And it's really easy if you're legalistic to then eventually throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yep.
Like, I'm just in it. If I, it's not time for self-confession, but like, if I'm going to do that with anything, it'll be my diet. Like, I'm trying really hard to be intentional in my diet, and we're setting some disciplines. But like, once I break it, then I'm like, might as well just, But the truth is that there's a compounding effect to making the choice to continually breaking something, even if that's just for a day, right? And I'm talking about calories or whatever. But the truth is that's true in a lot of things, right? Like, I didn't read scripture today, so I'm not gonna. I missed my morning time, so I'm gonna skip my evening time or whatever. Right? I didn't fast this week, so now I'm not gonna fast all month. Or,
there was a theologian or somebody that said, I can't remember exactly what the quote is, but it was something along the lines of, if you're gonna sin, go all out or something like that.
Just go all out.
It's like, if you're gonna do it anyways,
just go. We don't recommend that.
We don't recommend that.
No, I'm commenting on it, not recommending it. To be clear.
Well, so one of the things that I was when I was studying the text and just thinking about intentionality in general is that as Christians, we have a unique ability to say intentionality to what for what purpose.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's not like there's things that we do for health reasons, there's things that we do for financial reasons, but why would you guys say that the disciplines that we do, what is the purpose of those disciplines?
Well, ultimately, we're trying to, I think, find the fullness of life in Christ.
Yeah.
And I think
I'm glad that's what you said, because that's what I said in my sermon.
Right? And I didn't get a chance to listen to that part.
Because you were serving in Grace Kids, right?
Which was great, by the way. I love that. But yeah, the fullness of life, I mean, that's the classic John Mark Comer quote. I think it's from him. Maybe you got it from somebody else. If you want the life of Christ, if you want the fullness of life of Christ, you need the lifestyle of Christ. And so we adopt that kind of lifestyle and pattern for the fullness of life. I really appreciated, I don't know if you guys heard the Carey Nieuwhof, Tyler Staton podcast a couple of times, weeks ago or whatever. It was really good. And Tyler was, he's a pastor over at Bridgetown, and he says, I want joy. Like, I'm chasing joy kind of idea. And that's why I do all that. Like, I'm a hedonist at heart. Like, we want joy, but life and joy is found in Jesus and doing things that Jesus did. And so I really resonate with that. Like, I'm chasing joy. And I don't know if I would have said that a few years ago, but I'm like, that's really what I'm after now. Like, I need to enjoy things more. I want to enjoy
things. It's funny.
I
actually feel like I'm chasing peace.
Yeah,
like I just
different things.
Like I just want to be I want to be unflappable. Because I have a tendency to be a little dramatic at times, right? Like my highs are high, my lows are low. Like I just want to find that peace.
Yeah,
you know,
and the fruit of the spirit, right?
Right.
Part of that fruit. Right. So chasing joy, chasing peace. What are you chasing, Dusty?
I think for me, it's always intimacy of the relationship with the Lord. Is always what I'm chasing. Yeah. At least in this season, I feel like.
Yeah.
So like there's a couple of times I think in life that you mature really quickly, but it's taught me so much about how I view God. So like the first one was getting married, right? So when you get married, if whether you're married or not married, like one thing you learn really quick is you learn how to be unselfish. You learn that, hey, somebody else that I'm attaching myself to, their needs are at least as important, if not more important than my own. I need to do things unselfishly. Mm-hmm. I think God's the same way. I think the next thing is when you have kids, if you have kids, you learn really quickly what it is to sacrifice for them, 100% sacrifice, and to love them no matter what. Like, my kids can be terrors sometimes. Usually it's the little one, not the big one so much, but the little one can be a terror a lot of the time. But like, there's this weird thing about just how much, like, no matter how much they do, like, my love never changes for them. And it wasn't until I had them that I really started to understand, I think, how God views us. So going back to, sin and separation from God, like, man, just knowing how much God truly loves me, knowing how much God truly loves all of us, has really helped me deepen my intimacy with the Lord. And it's been awesome. Just viewing it like that. So every time my kids make me mad, I'm just thinking like, oh, that's how the Lord has viewed me over and over again.
Yeah. But and I don't think this is true with every discipline, but when we talk about spiritual disciplines, they exist to keep us in that relationship with Jesus. And so I talked a little bit about this on Sunday, is that, there's lead and lag measures, right? Which is what you talked about in the very first part of Thrive in 25, is what are the lead measures? And so kind of the idea is that your disciplines are your lead measures in what will hopefully be the lag measure, which is the relationship of Christ with Christ, right? And so how do you how often do you pause and look at your lead and lag measures when it comes to disciplines?
I don't know if I think in those terms.
Sure. How would you describe it? How do you know when a discipline's not serving you anymore?
Yeah, so I think the lagging indicators are probably the fruit of the Spirit. The love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. I think that's an indication of are these things working in my life or not. And so, so I look at that. I look at what I'm doing, and that's how I came to those 5 things in my life that I really need to have in my life to produce the joy and the peace and the patience. When I'm getting impatient, I go back and go, oh, probably something's missing, and I go back to my leading indicators. So I think that's just the simplest way of saying that. That's what I do.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Those in similar language and everything. I think that it's the lead indicators what prevent us from being reactionary in our relationship with the Lord. Which, when you're reactionary, when I find myself to be reactionary, it's like, hey, when I can feel myself being kind of thrown about by the winds of life, and it's like, oh, life's terrible right now, and that, if that hurts my relationship with the Lord, then I know I probably need to work on my lead indicators, because that means I'm living in my lag indicators, and the lag's not looking so good in those moments. Right. Which just goes back to the whole, I like the word habit better than discipline, just because discipline just makes me a little cringy, even though, spiritual disciplines is what we would call it. Yeah. But, how can I create those habits over and over again, no matter what I know my day is going to look like, to make sure those are the things that stay steady and in place, despite what the schedule is going to look like each day. And, again, that's a harder one for me, but one I'm trying to lean into more.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, thankfulness. Sometimes I struggle with thankfulness. So recently I've added the prayer of examine at the end of my day. I don't know if you're familiar. You're familiar?
I don't know it, but I've heard the term. I understand what it is.
Yeah. So it's just a list of kind of questions to think about throughout your day and how you were feeling and what you're thankful. And kind of that discipline there helps then create.
Do you have it memorized? Could you share it with us?
Oh boy.
Probably pull it up.
Yeah. You're supposed to think about, think through your day. And think about how you were feeling throughout the day, and how you saw God working through the day, and what you're, thankful for throughout the day. Kind of those kind of questions. You just kind of put a nice bow on the day before you put your head on the pillow finally.
Gratitude review, forgiveness, renewal.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a good habit or discipline in order to produce what we're hoping to get. Part of that fullness is, I think, thankfulness, right?
That's almost a little liturgical. we're only one step away from Advent here. Coming back to Advent Lent. Here we come.
The Book of Common Prayer.
You guys are any way you get me to be liturgical. I tell you.
That's true. It's fun.
So here's the thing I wanted to make sure that we talked about, because one of the hardest parts about preaching intentionality is that it's not you can't be prescriptive. Right, and one of the things I talk about in the sermon is that it's not a formula; it's a relationship, right? And so the way that the habits that you have, the habits that you have, the habits that I have, they're all different habits, but all for the same goal. So let me ask you this, and when you think about disciple making, which is something that we're super passionate about here, how do you disciple someone to examine their habits, knowing that they're not going to be your habits?
I would start with goals. I would start with hey, what are you hoping? Where do you want to go here? What do you want to be, or who do you want to be? And all those kind of goal things, and how do you get there? And you're gonna need these disciplines and habits to help get you there. I guess is maybe one way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just only disciple people exactly like myself, so I don't have to worry about it. That's not true. I wish I could.
Right.
But so far I don't think I've discipled, of the few people I've discipled, and I'm really excited. Today I'm actually starting another one, which is where I get to go after this meeting, so we're going to see how it goes.
Yeah.
But that one's going to be more similar to myself than, one of the other ones I'm in right now.
I actually think it's easier to disciple someone who's opposite of me.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to talk about that. I think for me it would be easier because understanding how the mind works and where those pitfalls and traps are helps me empathize and helps give hey, here's how this has worked in my life. Here's what I noticed. Kind of like when you're doing premarital counseling with people. It's you use a lot of your own marriage relationship in giving people, don't do this. I tried it. Didn't work very well.
Yeah.
But yeah, for people opposite, you learn a lot more though.
Well, so
That's the best. That's one of the best parts of
Yeah.
disciple making.
Well, and it forces me to lean into the side of myself that I'm not naturally
Yeah.
gifted at. So I'm a much more, if we think about the intentional relational scale, I'm much more on the relational side. So, but when I work with an intentional person, they naturally draw me over there because the relational side just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you have to be more intentional in order for them to be successful. So that's why I like the opposite side.
From here, we should start a disciple making relationship because I want to make you better.
Sure. Anytime. I'd be happy to have you disciple me.
What was the line that Jim Trussell gave you?
Right. Yeah. Let's see how that works out.
Let's see how that works out.
Oh, so let's do this. I would be interested to hear both of your guys' thoughts on if you're sitting across from someone who has maybe never thought about disciplines in their life. I want you to think about that young Christian, male, female, doesn't matter, someone who's like just really leaning into their relationship with Christ. And they're like, they heard this podcast and they're saying, okay, pastors, I want to be more intentional. What would you say is the first best step?
Here's, to me, a clarifying question. Wherever you're at,
Yeah.
and I wish, when I was coming up with the Gracie, with the I think this is the question I'm hoping people get to with it, is who am I here for? Any situation, sitting here right now, who am I here for? Am I here for me, or am I here to help give, life and energy and love to you guys or to people who are listening? Who am I here for? And I think that's such a clarifying question, as far as then it helps then prioritize and gives me a focus on it. I'm not intentionally going to be focusing on me. I'm going to be focusing on somebody else and what do they need. And I think that's a very helpful start. Who are you here for? Are you here for you? Or are you here to follow Jesus? Are you here for him? Are you here for his kingdom? That helps a lot of things.
Yeah, that's really good. I would guess the first place to go is just to really ask, it would be asking clarifying questions to them of like, hey, what, if you're new to faith, that's much easier, I think, right? Because working with a blank slate is much easier.
Sure.
I teach piano lessons, right? So it's so much easier to teach people good habits than to try to coach them out of bad habits they've already established, right? It's 3 times the work to do that. So if they're just looking for hey, tell me what I can do to start this relationship, well then it's, hey, we can go through the disciplines, we can go through scripture and prayer, and this is what it takes to have a relationship with the Lord, the same way it takes to have a relationship intentionally with your spouse or with your kids. It takes effort that you have to put into it, and I think the Lord is gracious enough to not bully his way into a relationship with us. So and we can get into some deeper theological stuff there for another day, but I think the Lord is gentle enough that he's not going to force himself into areas of your life that you're not willing to allow him in. Obviously God can intervene in whatever ways God wants to do, but I think for the most part, the Lord is very gracious and gentle with us. So my opening question then comes back to, where do you want the Lord to have access to your life, and how much of it? Because the goal is fullness, right? Like you said, it's God wants to be in control of all parts of your life. But sometimes it takes people a long time to get there.
Yeah.
And it just starts with hey, where can you let God in right now? How can we build an intentional step around that as a starting point?
And I think I would say something to the effect of, what can I do today to help strengthen my relationship with Jesus? And then if it works, repeat it. And if it doesn't work, shift it. Right? And so just keep chasing that deep, intimate relationship with Jesus. And for me, that's the overarching intentionality that will transform your life. In the church world, we call it the process of sanctification, of becoming more like Jesus. And that's, honestly, that's my prayer for the church family. That's my prayer for my family. That's my prayer for me, because there's a lot of days where I feel really not like Jesus. And so...
Yeah, I hope as our people come into our church building, right, again, the question of who am I here for? Disciple makers, I hope they're looking for people to disciple. I hope we're looking at guests and new folks that are coming in and relating to them and loving on them and connecting with them. So just the idea of taking our eyes off of ourselves, I think that has to be a big part of intentionality, because it's so natural to think about ourselves And is the worship music just right? Is the sermon connecting with me today? Is the coffee good? Is the kids, all those things. But is that what you're really here for? Or who are you here for?
Yeah. Closing thoughts?
Yeah. I think for our church people, understanding that bridging the gap to your relationship with Christ is the starting point, not the end point, is really good. I think depending on what kind of faith background you come from or denomination you may come from, I grew up very much in a way where it's like, hey, the goal is salvation. The goal is a relationship with Christ. Not that that's bad by any means, but it's like to view that as the starting point took me a lot more years to figure out. Like, hey, there's something God actually wants to do with me, and that's the beginning point. So what does sanctification look like? What does this discipleship for myself and disciple making as we multiply out to others look like? And just seeing like, man, there's a whole life to live in doing kingdom work like that, and I hope our people can get that. And I've actually got two resources. One that you guys, I'm sure, well, probably both you guys are intimately familiar with. If you're looking for some of those disciplines, for some of that intentionality, the classic one was the Richard Foster, right? Celebration of Discipline, Lutheran pastor, I think, from a good while ago. And then the other one that I've read more recently that I really enjoy, going back to Tyler Staton, is his newer book, Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools, is a little bit of a more contemporary take on what that looks like. So he talks about, some of the practices that you can very specifically and intentionally put into your life, like confession, what does prayer look like, and just a little more modern take on it for 2025.
Love it.
It's great.
Love it. Well, friends, that's our podcast for today. As always, if you have any feedback for us, questions, if you need us, we're embarrassingly easy to find. Dusty, Dave, Tony at centervillegrace.org. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen or watch. And hey, don't forget to share this with a friend. Maybe somebody you're pouring into, you want to talk about disciplines, you want some accountability. Sharing it is a great way to spread what God is doing here in this movement. So, as always, no one walks alone. We'll see you guys real soon.